Okay, well, I guess I'll do that announcement now. So we are at the almost the top of the hour. We will get started here in just a few minutes. But for those of you who are in attendance now, as you just saw the formal notice, we are going to record the meeting for those who, for one reason or another, aren't able to attend live. They'll be able to find it on the HGAR website for future consumption. We'll still give everyone a couple minutes. I see our participant count starting to really click up as it is. Well, it's still not quite actually new yet. So, oh, there we go. My phone just turned over on the hour. So we'll give people another minute or two to get here and then get started. We've got an exciting panel today with some fabulous experts who are going to chat with us about the new Manhattan.
So Brian, why don't I just give a really brief update
Sure.
on numbers? And I'm not really going to get specific today, but I did look at the August numbers and compared to the August numbers of 2020. And all of the numbers are, for the most part, positive. There are a few of our counties in our market area that are a little bit flat, but remember 2020 August last year, it was a wild market. I mean, the market was just raging at that point.
Yeah.
What is interesting, though, is the closer you get to Manhattan, the stronger the numbers become. So Westchester is actually significantly higher. Queens is significantly higher. Brooklyn is, and Bronx. So it seems as though proximity to the city right now, at least comparing this August to last August, the market's a little bit healthier, which I thought was a very interesting trend.
Yeah, and Manhattan trends as well. Manhattan's up significantly this August over last August. Yeah. Yeah, I think I do remember last August was hot and heady. There were, things weren't even really staying on market more than their initial showing day. I mean, it was just moving so fast. And I think we're still seeing some of that happen, but there's, we've gotten I think everyone has gotten very comfortable in some of their COVID pandemic protocols of how they transact. We've all gotten used to and very comfortable with how we're transacting. And so the volume that's coming onto the market is moving through quickly, I would imagine, versus last August. Okay, well, we are 2 minutes in. We will get started here. And those that show up here and after will just have to chime in. So I'm very excited to welcome all of our participants and attendees to today's panel. We have some excellent individuals here to speak to you about the new Manhattan and sort of both our current new Manhattan as well as some really futurescape things that we look to see in the future of our fine city. With that, I am going to turn over to Richard for some introductions on the series and HGAR. And then we'll get back to some housekeeping items and kick off on the conversation.
Great, thank you, Brian. And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Be Your Best, our webinar series to share best practices for conducting business amid a changing landscape. I'm Richard Haggerty, CEO of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. We're a not-for-profit trade association representing more than 13,000 real estate professionals in Manhattan, the Bronx, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Orange counties. I'm also President and Chief Strategic Growth Officer for One Key MLS, the comprehensive multiple listing service for the New York region. One Key has more than 44,000 subscribers and serves the region from Montauk to Manhattan to Monticello. Today, we focus on getting deals done in the new Manhattan. After an unprecedented year of shutdowns, New York City is open for business. And today we have the perfect panel of experts to delve into all of the developments, from Hudson Yards to Penn Station to Roosevelt Island. We're pleased to partner with TitleVest and have President Brian Tormay moderate our discussion again today. TitleVest is a leading New York City-based title insurance agency and member of the First American family of companies, offering a wide range of services for real estate property purchase and refinance transactions. TitleVest has offices in Manhattan and Westchester and engages in transactions upstate, downstate, and nationwide. TitleVest has won the New York Law Journal's Best Title Agency Award every year since 2013. Now let's meet our panel. Sherry Tobeck is the Senior Vice President of the related companies in New York City. Sherry is currently overseeing the sales of the residential condominium portfolio for Hudson Yards. Also joining us is Paul Macy, CEO of B6 Real Estate Advisors, a commercial brokerage firm in New York City. B6 is short for building by building, block by block. And we also have Michael Samuelian, the founding director of the Cornell Tech Urban Tech Hub. Michael is an urban planner, real estate developer, professor, and most recently president and CEO of the Trust for Governor's Island. Sherry, Michael, and Paul, thank you so much for joining us. And Brian, as I read that first intro paragraph, which I've now been reading for more than a year, sharing best practices for conducting business amid a changing landscape. Boy, that hasn't changed, has it? Our landscape just keeps on changing. It's like change is our new norm.
Change is our new norm. It's interesting. Speaking, we were talking a little bit about some of the environmental concerns earlier while we were warming up, and I will say I had this fabulous podcast where they talked about, change as a new norm has been the sort of mantra for the last decade. I mean, there's just been so much change happening in the world on so many fronts, but our marketplace is so dynamic. I feel like New York has always been a place of great change, but boy, is it speeding up. This last year and a half has been so many changes, what we were talking about in last August and some of the technologies that were cutting edge, and people are starting to do remote online notarizations and this and closing virtually and remotely. And now it's like, it's an old hat. We're so used to it, and we're now on to the next piece. So anyway, no further ado, as I want to get into the meat and potatoes here. A few quick housekeeping items for all those in attendance. Your questions are very welcome. We look forward to hearing your comments and feedback along our presentation. We won't really have a Q&A section all the way at the end. We sort of encourage you to ask questions along the way. The main methodology is down at the bottom of your screen, or possibly at the top, depending on the device you're using, is a Q&A function box, a little icon. Please click that, submit your question there, include your name, and we will narrate your question out loud for everyone and sort of find the appropriate time in the conversation to slot it in. And all voices are also welcome. If you feel like you have a question that you want to explain out loud, you're welcome to include that in the Q&A function that you'd like to speak to it, and we can unmute your line. Just make sure to include your name as well. Otherwise, we've got everyone muted for today's conversation just to help keep the background noise at a minimum. And we encourage everyone to use the chat function for additional commentary, sort of shout outs, feedback, things that don't need to be answered directly as a question. Richard, you already sort of hit on some of the stats and market moves. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, or?
Nope.
Good to go? Good. Okay. Well, with that, let's get into our panel. Today we're talking about the current, the now new Manhattan. And I'm going to turn to Michael first. In our prep conversation, you had some very interesting comments on sort of the natural resiliency of New York City. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to you.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks everyone for inviting me to participate today. It's always fun to kind of get out of the normal day-to-day and kind of think bigger about and on the city and reflect on what we've been through. But I think this theme of resiliency is so timely, and even when we were prepping for this, it was pre-Ida, so it's even more timely when we think about the traumas that New York City has continued to be through, and how we've bounced back. I mean, we're 2 days from the 20-year memorial of 9/11. You think about certainly folks in the real estate world thinking about the impact of those events on the city, and this question of, is New York City dead? Is New York City not coming back? Will anyone ever work in a skyscraper again? Will anyone live in a tall building again? And then you fast forward a decade and a half later, and we're celebrating Hudson Yards opening and building 1,000-foot tall buildings over rail yards. So I'm always struck by the resiliency of New York and the fact that we continue to bounce back, because New York is a magnet. And this focus on attracting young people and attracting talent is something that we've also thought a lot about during COVID. When the spread from cities, when you could work from anywhere, and yet why do cities continue to rebound? It's that connectivity, it's the interactions that really bring people together. So, I mean, resiliency is core to New York and our ability to bounce back, but I do think we can't lose focus on, what makes the city great. It's the diversity, it's the culture, it's, people just don't come to work in a generic office building, all due respect to real estate folks. They come for all the other stuff that attracts us to a place, whether it's culture, open space, great restaurants, and the things that make a city unique from suburbs and broader regions. So we need to continue to focus on the diversity that actually brings us together and the connections that really make us stronger, and also not losing sight of the equity issue. With I just had this discussion in a class of mine yesterday, that the city is a incredibly diverse place, and our diversity is our strength. So we can't always play the top. We need to ensure that we have a much more inclusive economy, because that's a key component of our resiliency.
Yeah, very much agreed. Well, Sherry, Michael sort of gave that softball there, the 15-year mark on Hudson Yards. Talk to us about Hudson Yards, one of the biggest new frontiers for this amazing island.
Actually, Hudson Yards is the largest privately held real estate development in American history. So I wear that moniker proudly. I think that Hudson Yards, obviously, Michael just opened up the door to Hudson Yards. Michael was very, very instrumental in putting Hudson Yards together, and we certainly miss having him around. I work on the residential portfolio at Hudson Yards, and I see what's happening around me. It is active, it is exciting, it is really, really busy. In terms of residential sales, I was looking at some numbers before this call today. We sold 38 apartments this summer. Now that is a lot of apartments when you're talking about apartments starting at $4 million and going up to, over $50 million. These are not inexpensive apartments. And yet the pace of sales is tremendous right now. I think we had our busiest August literally since we opened the sales office. So I see New York really coming back. I mean, we like to talk about Hudson Yards as the new New York, or, the new city within the city, the new way that people are living in New York. The convenience of Hudson Yards, obviously, is that you can live here, you can work here, you can play here, you never have to leave. And yet when you want to leave, you're not too far away from everything that New York City has to offer. So we see the restaurants really, really crowded, the stores really, really crowded, the plaza, all of the activations that our marketing and PR teams have put together for us are just drawing people from all over the world. And our residential is just exploding. So there's much to be said about the new New York and the resiliency of New Yorkers. As Michael was saying, I think that, New York, I mean, I am a born and raised New Yorker, so I know that's a rare and dying breed. And I've seen the resiliency of New Yorkers for many, many, many years. Obviously now we are facing new challenges every single day. And with those new challenges, give us the opportunity to show how resilient and strong and amazing New Yorkers can be. So from where I sit, New York is back. New York is getting better than ever. I see that as I'm sitting in my office right now and I look across to 55 Hudson Yards. Just months ago, I didn't see a single person. Now I see half the office is occupied. I'm looking in and I see other people working. And
Is that me?
Nope.
Okay, I think Sherry.
Sherry's
coming
frozen.
back to work,
There we go.
I'm excited about that. Did you lose me?
For just a quick second, but we still
Okay.
sensed your excitement and enthusiasm. It came through.
Well, we're very excited and we're very enthusiastic, and we
Yeah.
hope that this pace continues throughout, as Michael was saying, the new challenges that we had, that even a week ago, we had less challenge than we even have now with the weather and things that have been really challenging for New Yorkers. We're here, we're not going anywhere, and we're excited to see what tomorrow is going to bring.
Yeah. And on the topic of bounce back being strong, I'm going to turn to the microphone to you, Paul, in a second. Michael also mentioned 9/11. And I remember I was an EMT at the time, being down at Ground Zero on 9/11 almost 20 years ago, and thinking just really in the weeks after, wow, New York City is never going to be the same. And Paul, you had some really interesting both stats and commentary on this, on the eve of our 20-year anniversary. So I hand the microphone to you.
Yeah, and Brian, thanks. Brian and I are old friends, and I greatly appreciate the invite to be with all of you here today, and look forward to definitely look forward to audience participation too, so that it can be about what you want to hear about and are curious about. But we were talking about incredible parallels between what happened at 9/11 and the current pandemic. We there was serious questioning about the viability of downtown, both commercially and residentially, and we got back to rebuilding almost right away, and multiple factors involved, but downtown, for example, had 400, well, all of Manhattan had 400 million square feet. We lost 30 million in the attack. We rebuilt that with modern structures, and we added another 50 million square feet since then, which includes Hudson Yards, Manhattan West, and we're able to create new submarkets, entirely new submarkets. So I think the resiliency of New York is fantastic.
Yeah, agreed. It is.
Here.
It is a whole.
We had an interesting thing about a year ago. So mid-pandemic, we're commercial real estate brokers. We sell buildings, represent people selling buildings and financing buildings, and so we're having these sales meetings and trying to liven them up, trying to get engagement from people. It was all new to us at the time, so we started having guest speakers come. And I have a great old friend who is a pretty renowned historian, Kevin Draper. And I invited him to come and talk to our team. Just tell us something about New York City, the place we love so much. Tell us some of the history. And he got on the call and said, New York has had a pandemic in every century since it started. The 1700s, we had cholera. The 1800s, we had typhoid. The Spanish flu of 1918. And he said, and now this current one. So there've been 4 major pandemics in New York City that we don't think about. And what happened, he said, was that people would leave the city. There was some form of an exodus from the city for a year or two in each case. And then the city would come roaring back. Like the Roaring 20s is a description of New York City post the 1918 Spanish flu. So this town, this city has an amazing ability to go through, crazy weather, the tragedy of 9/11, 4 pandemics. We keep coming back, and I think we always will.
Yeah, I agree, Paul, and I'm inspired and emboldened by the commentary. Michael, I'm going to turn it to you. You had being someone who's worked in sort of these, sort of private and government kind of projects and larger macro changes to the landscape here of New York. Give us some of your commentary and perspective on how that happens and the sort of timeline around how these kind of big turnarounds happen and these larger projects get pulled together.
Well, full disclosure, as an urban planner, I think it comes down to planning, and I think in New York, we don't give enough credit to planners, and planners are government officials, planners are real estate folks, planners are, the planning department as well. So I use planning in a very, broad sense, but just building what Paul was saying about the rebound of downtown after 9/11, I happened to work for the planning department at the time, and under incredible leadership from the Bloomberg administration, just thinking about the components that helped downtown rebuild were certainly subsidies and helping out businesses, but it was really a focus on diversifying Lower Manhattan in terms of land use, so attracting residents, because you don't normally think of you need residents to make a great CBD, but in fact you want to have a 24/7 neighborhood. And those of us who were in New York pre 9/11 know that downtown wasn't the greatest place to work pre 9/11 either. Frankly, it really kind of shut down at 5 p.m. But if you go to it, again, pre-COVID, because I think downtown has renewed challenges, but it was a place that was very vibrant, from Stone Street to the new Pier 17 to beautiful parks in Battery Park City. It was a focus on retail, residential, and building public open space. So that were some of the invisible components that really helped, I think, in Lower Manhattan's recovery. When it comes to something like Hudson Yards, which is, I would say, being one of the folks who worked on it, I think I can say this, not been, as well received by the public as maybe the real estate market, it's viewed as a private sector project, but in fact, it was, Senator Schumer, who wrote a report, 3 months before 9/11, by the way, in June of 2001, that said New York City needs to focus on commercial development in a comprehensive way and really think about integrating both the city's powers and the state's powers in order to help promote development. I mean, in the 1990s, for those of us that were around then, there was barely any office construction at all in New York, and maybe 9 million square feet was built in all of the 90s. And if you just look at places like Hudson Yards or the area around Grand Central or Lower Manhattan, you can see this incredible rebound of the commercial office market, which is the real, I think, vote of confidence in the future of New York and the commercial viability of it. And then the last point on this theme of resiliency, when we think about one of the biggest tenants in Hudson Yards is Facebook, and they didn't even exist 20 years ago. So you need to really think flexibly about your space and your future, that we're building for generations. We're not building for the current market. And so we can't be so reactive, but I think if there's a lesson to be learned is how do we collectively, the public sector, the private sector, the institutional sector where I am right now, really think proactively about planning for the future of the city.
Yeah. Paul, I'm going to go to you next on this, under the topic of sort of, as we start to shift into like, what's next, right? We've talked about some of the exciting things that are here today in Manhattan and what's next. You've got a very strong and distinct perspective on the back to office question, the question that everyone's asking, is this here to stay? Is this, what's going to happen? And I'd be curious to hand you the microphone and let you share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier about the fact that this may not be a completely popular perspective. I've got 20-something-year-old kids who have enjoyed a lot about remote work, but I really think it's a fad. I think that especially services businesses who have to act as a team need that human chemistry, need to be with each other, need for young people to learn from the proximity to mentors and coaches and their managers. And I think a year from now, I understand certain small segments of the economy will embrace work from home, and that will be there, but I think we'll be significantly back in the office. And I think a year from now, this will be some kind of a memory.
Well, I hope you're right in many ways. I think it's exciting. I was chatting with Richard and Gary at the head of this. We've been doing these for 18 months. And while I've been coming into the office, Thursdays, I typically work from home. And so I've been doing these all from home. And I will say, getting back into the office more is definitely bringing some extra bounce to my step. The more and more I get back into a full week routine in the office. Well, with that, I want to, ask Michael, I'm going to go to you next on what are some of the things you're most excited about as we start to look, not just the what's done, what's in place now, but sort of what's coming around the corner.
Well, I think, to give a bit of a pitch for my current day job at the Urban Tech Hub at Cornell Tech, I think, the embrace of new technologies in the city and the opportunity that they begin to give us when it comes, we've never known more about the city than we do today in terms of information. And some of it's good, some of it's bad. There are certainly huge privacy issues that we need to be sensitive to with regard to collecting data, but we can do everything from optimizing urban systems, making the trains better, to making the system fairer and really thinking about ways of connecting communities in ways that we've never been doing it before. On the horizon, I think there's this incredible disruption that's going to come in two ways. One, decarbonizing our economy. And I think that there's a lot of good efforts on, the renewable energy side, but also thinking about electric vehicles and maybe most importantly, autonomous vehicles. So we live in a city, and cities are the best place to experiment with some of these technologies, particularly when you think about parked cars, something we deal with a lot, or congestion, and trying to get through city streets. So we're very much at the teasing phase, I think, in terms of technology and the city. When you think about trying to get through Midtown and being behind a FedEx truck or a UPS truck or an Amazon truck. So we've gotten the benefits of, just-in-time delivery. And I think many of us embrace it, and it has gotten so many people through COVID, particularly those that were older and couldn't get out and shouldn't get out. So there's a huge upside to having just-in-time deliveries, but there's a huge downside if you sat in traffic trying to get through Midtown Manhattan or congested parts of Brooklyn or Queens. So I think the increasing role of autonomous vehicles for deliveries is going to be incredible for the city in terms of benefits. It's going to be tricky in terms of regulating it, but why do we have a huge FedEx truck deliver a 1 foot by 1 foot package to your doorstep? I mean, that is just environmentally outrageous, but also it's inefficient. So the market has to really catch up to the reality of last mile delivery and then decarbonizing it. I mean, I think we need to think very, very seriously about that last mile is very dirty. I was just talking to my class about, imagine, getting a banana from, Ecuador to New York is not a big deal on a boat, but then getting it from the South Bronx to your office, cafe, that is incredibly dirty from a carbon standpoint and incredibly inefficient and incredibly costly. So I think there's a huge opportunity when it comes to last mile delivery and also autonomous vehicles. And then the urban designer in me, lastly, I mean, imagine every parked car disappearing from your street. I mean, there's a huge boon that we're seeing during COVID in terms of restaurants taking over street space and really increasing the amount of public space for people to use and small businesses to take advantage of. So I think that's just the beginning of an incredible trend where we have to take back, and I'm a driver, I fully admit it, but I think we need to balance, how much space we give to cars versus how much we give to people.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine is an author by the name of Tom Vanderbilt, who's written some interesting books called Traffic and a couple other things. And there was one where he compiled all this data from the amount of cars moving. And I believe that it was in 2 or 3 neighborhoods in Manhattan and 2 or 3 neighborhoods in Brooklyn, where essentially they queried, why are you driving your car? And it was like 35% of people were just changing parking spots, right? It was like a third of the traffic was just people. And I'm sure I'm getting the stats slightly wrong. I haven't read that book for many years, but it's a very interesting perspective, Michael, that, we really are as a city, a place to re-envision what the future could be. And we could use some change. Sherry, when we were chatting about transportation the other day, you had some definite thoughts on sort of, how to gear our thinking. Do you want to share some of those on your thoughts on scooters?
I think, we touched a little bit about, why people are going back to the office, the advantages of people going back to the office, and that water cooler conversation, or, the older people mentoring the younger people and the interaction and how to bring people back. I think that we are living in a youthful society. I think that most of the people that we're hiring are young and youthful, and I think that they are looking at things a little differently than we did. So I think it's important now to start designing our office space for younger people. I don't think everybody's looking for big giant offices, but kind of a cohabitation where everybody works in one room, and so they can share their perspectives and there's kind of a back to youth movement, I think, in the workplace. And I think that's something that we should really be paying attention to. So, our old way of working, the big conferences and the big conference rooms, they're really coming down to Zoom meetings, and you can get a lot more people into a room and a lot more safely than you used to. I think if we follow the lead of the youth, we will all be stronger and smarter and, definitely more efficient than we have been over the years.
I think Sherry's absolutely right. We at Cornell, we were mostly remote. Well, we were all remote last year, but we just opened campus 2 weeks ago. And we have students from around the world, and they came to Cornell because of New York City, and they're attracted. The city continues to be a magnet for young people, and there is such a hunger and pent up demand on their part to be in the city, to go out, to experience all that New York has to offer. And I think we should find a way to really take advantage of it and kind of ensure that those folks not just come to New York to go to school, but that they stay, and that it's affordable enough for them to stay, and there are enough jobs for them to stay here.
Well, affordability, that's a big issue, obviously, but yeah, if we followed their lead and they make money, we'll make money too. So I think that I just think that life works that way. You know, when I was younger, I felt it on the opposite side, and now I see it more and more this way. I think it's important to, you know, kind of take our lead and be more flexible about how we work and how we live in the workplace and how we spend our money and where we go and what we do, and, you know, combine all of that with younger people and older people, and all just work together and, you know, make things a lot more accessible.
Yeah. One quick question from the chat for you, Sherry. How many total units are in both 15 and 35 Hudson Yards?
Oh, that's a very easy question. We have 2 residential towers at Hudson Yards. 35 Hudson Yards has 143 apartments. 15 Hudson Yards has 285 apartments. So, you know, together we have a lot of inventory. 15 Hudson Yards is really close to 80% sold. So we're really counting down to the end of that building, which I think we will see that building sell out. Our total sales so far between the 2 buildings has been $1.25 billion. Wow. So sales are brisk, and we are, you know, hitting marks that I've never in all my years in this industry been able to have bragging rights of over $1 billion in sales in a short period of time. So good amount of apartments, but not that much left.
Yeah, that we'll come back to some of the futurescape things, but that touches back to one of the topics we discussed about the, you know, sort of what is the vibe in Manhattan now? And if you're achieving that kind of sell through, you know, are you seeing that is foreign money returning? Are those domestic investors? Are these, you know, personal use? Can you give us some thoughts on sort of the patterns you're seeing?
Fair market doesn't let me tell you too much, but I can say this: the foreign market has definitely slowed down since COVID. There is no question about it. I see it coming more and more, kind of opening up just a little bit. One of the problems is that there are foreign buyers who want to purchase, but they can't get their money out of their country. So that seems to be an issue. There are also a limited number of banks that will finance right now to foreign buyers. So foreign buyers usually make up a huge portion, a huge percentage of our sales base, obviously, not just at Hudson Yards, but in many high-end luxury type buildings. So we are seeing that, but I'm also seeing more and more and more domestic buyers. And I don't even just mean New York. I mean, obviously a lot of New Yorkers are coming to Hudson Yards because everything they can get on the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side or West Chelsea or the Meatpacking District, all of the activities that they're used to, where they get their coffee, where they get lunch, where they have dinner, where they work out, it's all here at Hudson Yards. And I think people are seeing that more and more. So for that reason, yeah, more domestic, but we're seeing Florida, we're seeing California, we're seeing Texas, we're seeing, you know, pretty much a good amount of domestic buyers buying as their second home or their third home or their fourth. The primary buyers, the buyers who are living here full time, I find to be mostly New Yorkers.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that perspective with us. I am gonna, there is a question in the Q&A, but I'm gonna read through it here and bring that up in a second. I'm gonna turn to one of the questions that as we enter both the fall, but sort of look forward into the future of New York, I think is on at least my mind, and I think many others. Outdoor dining. We've just had another lovely summer of so many restaurants getting to sit outside and enjoy sort of outdoor dining and sort of a streetscape. So many restaurants have invested in making it a very pleasurable sort of, it's, you know, in the beginning it was just some tables out on the sidewalk, and now there's real sort of some infrastructure around it. I'm gonna go around the horn and query you all on, do you think it will remain? Do you think it should remain? You know, what are some of your pros and cons on our current outdoor dining regime? remaining. So Sherry, we'll start with you.
Let's jump in. Personally, I love it. Personally, I go out to dinner almost every night because I love sitting outside and watching the world go by. Again, I'm a real New Yorker and I love the idea of it. On the downside, it is taking away parking. It is getting in the way of pedestrian traffic. The delivery, I think we talked about this in our prep call, the delivery bicycles are definitely a problem. So you have, speeding bicycles coming by, which could, ultimately be a problem. You have huge restaurants that are at some points out in the street. You feel the traffic whiz by and you wonder, is that going to jam right into my, my pasta? So I think there's positive and negative. I personally love it. It reminds me of Europe. It reminds me of Italy, where you have cafes everywhere and people are joining and talking and sharing and being New Yorkers. So for that, I love it. Whether or not we can work on the congestion that it's causing and the lack of parking, as Michael was saying, and we too have a car in New York, and it's impossible to park your car. So there are definitely negatives, but on a personal level, I hope it continues. I hope it continues right through the winter. I've seen it in other states. I've done a little bit limited traveling this year, domestically, not out of the country. And I see that these outdoor restaurants are happening literally all over the country. So I do think it's a trend that's here to stay, but I think we need, I don't know, some kind of urban planner or something to figure out what we do with the cars and how we avoid bicycles ramming into us.
Sure. Michael, that was a handoff. There we go.
Thanks
What
for
do
the
you think, sir?
softball. I feel like we're playing tennis. Look, I'm a huge fan of it. I agree with everything that Sherry said. I mean, this is one of those silver linings of COVID. There are only a handful, so I think we need to hold on to them. Because at least the neighborhood I live in Brooklyn, Prospect Heights, it's incredible. If any of you on the call haven't been to Vanderbilt Avenue, come here. It's transformative in terms of the type of community that comes out, the way that people can really experience the space, and a rebalancing of our priorities. So I think what Sherry said is right. It is beautiful, but it also has to be regulated. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of regulation in all aspects, but this is one place where we need to now do kind of a reckoning of how we're using what were perceived as parking spaces. I mean, those are only parking spaces because we made them into parking spaces when cars were invented, by the way. Like those just used to be parts of like a street network where whether they were horse and carriages or people selling goods. So we just need to think comprehensively about how we use curbside space. And whether it's a restaurant or even thinking about trash receptacles. I mean, that's an idea that's been thrown out a lot. It's embarrassing the way we handle trash in New York City. That we walk over piles of garbage, which is just New Yorkers. We just have gotten used to it, and we don't see it. But take around any of your friends from another city or another country, and they just imagine, how does one of the richest cities in the world have like trash on our streets consistently? So if we don't really think about how we deal with trash, I think that that's one of those areas of urban systems that we really need to think about. Maybe there's a technological solution, maybe there's a policy solution, but I think this is just the beginning of looking at curbside previous parking spaces in a much more comprehensive way, and including new mobility lanes, as we talked about in a report that we issued at the hub. So we've just painted green lanes on streets and called them bike lanes. Fine, a good band-aid, but we do need to think comprehensively about how and where we regulate bicycles and e-bikes and scooters. And there are only going to be more and more of these devices coming in the kind of micro-mobility world that are going to be beneficial to the city, because it means that you can kind of change a bit where you live. You don't always have to live on top of a subway station. You can live a 20-minute walk. But I do think that these restaurants are an indication that we need to think, building face to building face, where there's a street, where there's a pedestrian space, where there's a bike space, where there's a car space, where there's a restaurant space. And it's not rocket science. We just need to take the initiative to be proactive about thinking about our streets in a much more balanced way.
Yeah, that well said. From that, as I think about the streetscape, one of the things that I think is, one of the big changes that was happening before the pandemic, and then we've really seen it expand during the pandemic is the retail side of our fine city and the changes there. Paul, I'll turn it over to you. And if you have any commentary on outdoor dining, you're welcome to get that in there too. But I'm going to turn it over to you for some thoughts on retail and that side of the market as well.
My thought on the dining was, why should Italy have all the fun? So I think it's fantastic. And Michael talked about change and how we need to manage it. I think we'll figure out how to have a lot of outdoor dining now in a safe and organized way. And I thought that retail makes up a huge component of the value of the buildings that we sell. It's just a critical element. It's a critical aspect of our daily urban life. And I thought pre-COVID retail had hit bottom. I think technology had changed the landscape for a lot of tenants, but I thought that the tenants that were in place prior to the virus were ones that were learning to embrace technology, deal with technology. Personal services tenants, restaurants, bars were set to thrive. I think the delay in getting back to work has really put a hurt on a lot of those tenants, especially in the Midtown and downtown office areas. If you go into the neighborhoods like Brooklyn or the Village or any of the neighborhoods in the city, I think there's an exuberance and life has come back, but we need to focus on the office markets and the retail surrounding that, and get those tenants back in business through a combination of landlords helping with rents, the city helping with not just attracting small tenants, big and small, but deregulating some of the stuff they deal with on a day-to-day basis that makes profitability a challenge. But I think there's a massive opportunity in retail right now, in buying retail buildings, in setting up retail shops. I know there are restaurateurs who are in the expansion mode now because they view the current rents as a significant long-term opportunity for them right now. So I think retail, if you consider the fact that it's at a relative all-time low in terms of rents, and that we know that people want these personal services tenants, we're going to have good times ahead.
Okay, interesting.
Brian, can I ask a question, Brian?
Yeah, please.
There was a great op-ed piece by Mike Bloomberg yesterday in the New York Times, and he was talking about the importance of planning a decade out even more. And Michael really touched on this with some of his comments earlier. And I live on the Upper East Side, so I'm thinking about the effect that the 2nd Avenue subway had in my neighborhood in terms of Sherry and the extension of the 7 train all the way to Hudson Yards. And Bloomberg also talked about the redesign or the after 9/11 of Lower Manhattan and how they deliberately inserted a residential component into that. Do you see that kind of thoughtful planning occurring right now that's going to potentially shape the city in 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, we have not yet mentioned the 2 new administrations that we're dealing with right now, both the city and state level. So I'm optimistic. I think there's an opportunity. I can't really speak for the current administration in terms of long-term planning thinking, but I do think there's some hope in the Adams administration, or let's say the presumptive Adams administration, to really think big picture about the city's recovery. But I do think challenges create opportunities. So the question is, will we take advantage of the challenges that we faced in the past year and a half, from COVID to Ida? I would say, Cornell Tech is a pure reaction to the 2008 financial crisis. And we often don't think about it that way, but it was, again, Mayor Bloomberg who said, we need to diversify our market. We're too dependent on the financial industry, and we need to really embrace tech and promote it. hence we, create Cornell Tech. It wasn't that easy, but, that was, the short story of taking a challenge like the '08 financial crisis and creating something completely unexpected, like a new engineering campus on Roosevelt Island. So I think it's an open question. I don't see it right now. I mean, I think we're talking about like little things that we're doing, like, sidewalk cafes. I mean, that's not planned. I mean, those are wonderful, but that's not a comprehensive vision for the city. I do think there's a huge opportunity, and I'm hopeful that the new administration really takes on the NIMBYism that many of us in the real estate industry have dealt with. You can't have affordability without growth. So I am certainly pro-development, and I think the city has had a variant relationship with growth. I think people don't want new things in their neighborhoods, but there's no way that we can continue to grow as a city if we don't allow for more and more development. I was really excited by the census and having 500,000 New Yorkers. I mean, that is just great news and a very important indicator for the city, particularly in light of the fact that the census was taken during COVID, when, at least if you read the New York Times, everybody left the city, but in fact, we got 500,000 more residents. So I'm hopeful that the new administration really takes a pro-growth stance, because I do think we have an opportunity to really learn from this challenge in terms of having more people come to New York and to live, in a diverse and equitable city.
Heels of that, Paul, I'm going to come back to you with some thoughts on sort of, how are the rent regulations that we've seen in the last year and change, how are those impacting the market, both on value as well as sort of the process of what landlords, your prime clientele, like how is their decision making impacted?
Well, so we're referencing the 2019 rent regulations that were put in place by the state legislature, effectively saying you can't raise your rents, and also saying that you can't fix up the units that you have and pass any of that expense through to the tenants. So freezing 1 million rent regulated and controlled apartments. And I think that is so utterly misguided, maybe for a reason we don't think about enough, but the city's budget is approaching $100 billion. The annual budget of New York City is approaching $100 billion. Roughly 45 to 50% of that revenue comes from buildings like those. So when you, in a lot of cases, when you eliminate the ability to raise rents and to fix up the buildings, you cause the value of those buildings to drop potentially in half. So when assessed values tank and the city's has a $10 billion budget shortfall, the city doesn't have a lot of variability in its budget between bond payments, retirement payments, benefit payments. The first thing to go are the social programs that help the people that the legislators were, I think, misguidedly trying to help, right? So we've got to go back and look at those rent regulations so that people will invest in our housing stock. Our housing stock is older on average than 80 years. So we need to be retrofitting, rebuilding the housing that we have. 500,000 new people to New York is a fantastic thing. But that, based on the 2.5 people per family, rough math, we need 200,000 new units just to accommodate the people who are moving into the city. It gets back to something Michael was touching on, which is we don't want to be a barbell society. We don't want to just have rich folks and people who are struggling. We can't operate like that. We need to be a city that has a robust middle class. And housing is a huge element of that. We have to be affordable.
Yeah, I think well said. Sherry or Michael, any commentary on that side of things? Sherry?
I'm concerned about rent regulation. I think that there are a lot of rent stabilized apartments in New York, and I think that landlords being unable to raise the rent or pass along any of the renovations to their renter. I think that will prevent people from, moving and being able to rent apartments. You're talking about affordable housing, those rent stabilized apartments are hard to come by. So there are, as we all know, lots of very wealthy people spending $1,500 a month on rent because their apartments are stabilized and they'll never move on. And it kind of stumbles the economy a little bit. So, I don't agree with it. I think rent controlled apartments, there are a lot of elderly people who have held on to their apartments for 50 years and they can't certainly afford to live anywhere else. So, my heart kind of goes out to that, but rent stabilized apartments that are being misused are, I think problematic for our industry.
Two reactions to what Paul said. I mean, one, I think it's probably one of the third rails for any politician, but really thinking about real estate taxes comprehensively. And I think certainly everyone on this call knows far more than I do, but the imbalance of who pays what in real estate taxes is incredible, but just no politician will, take that on, at least as far as I've been able to see. But we have, a real inequity in terms of how and who we charge real estate taxes and at what rates. But I think, bigger picture in response to your question, Richard, as I think about it and reflect, past 3 minutes on what you said, a decade and a half ago, and not to just be so, pro Bloomberg administration, but, a decade ago, we had numerous big projects on the table, from the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan to Atlantic Yards to Hudson Yards. And now you can't really see them. I mean, where are the big projects that we're planning for the next 10 or 20 years in the city? There was a nascent attempt to rebuild or build the top Sunnyside Yards, which went nowhere. But that's a huge opportunity for thousands and thousands of new units, in Queens, very close to the city. We still have lots of industrial properties that could be rezoned. We have all of, Staten Island, frankly, that, can use more density. So there are lots of parts of the city that we could densify, but I just haven't seen the vision to really think big picture about big projects that we can really take on and build much more supply, not just for the near term, but really for the long term.
I think Michael Bloomberg is the poster child for thinking big and long-term planning. I mean, look at all the, the Cornell Tech Center, the High Line. I mean, he had his hand in so many 10 and 15-year projects. I think we should dissect that op-ed piece, every single word of it, and use that as our roadmap for moving ahead. I think he's an incredible gentleman in the way that he didn't meddle, with politics, at least locally, after his time was up. But he's a very, very wise man, and every idea there's a seed of greatness probably in every idea that he has.
And Paul, to your point, quite frankly, I agree with everything you said about the changes to the rent laws, and we continue to fight good cause eviction, but the politicians right now are so focused on the short term, they're not looking at the long-term effects, and it's really going to haunt us, I think, in the years to come unless we change course.
On that, we're nearing the top of the hour. I'm gonna, Robert had a comment in the chat. He's grown up in the business for 34 years. He remembers when Massey Knackle was first started, and bravo, Paul, for your sale of that and relaunching B6. And he turns in the question he asks is, what is your advice for today and some ideas for a successful plan in this very changing market? And I think that may be a good sort of question to put to each of you in succession. Commentary and thoughts and perspectives for our audience on, in light of all the insights and perspective you have as people whose fingers are very much on the pulse of all the change that has happened and what is in store for our future, thoughts, comments, and advice for our principally, real estate professional, mostly agents and brokers in attendance today, thoughts on their business plans and how they should be thinking about the future of New York City. Sherry, I'm going to start. Ladies first.
Okay, well, as the lady of this panel, yes. Look, I think that, this person has been in this business for a long time, so it sounds as though he doesn't need much advice. I think the biggest piece of advice that I ever give to people in this business is flexibility. And that sounds like the, you know, kind of the mantra of this entire panel, because things are changing every day, and we need to go with that flow. We need to be flexible on the rules. We need to be flexible on the challenges. You know, the business has changed so much since I've been doing this, and there are new rules, there are new regulations, there are problems that arise all the time that somehow you have to either overcome or let your buyers think that they've been overcome. There are ways that you have to work with people. And I think, to me, I guess the secret to success, I think, is kind of A, being flexible, and B, being a chameleon. You know, meeting your client and figuring out what your client really is about, what they need, what they want, and how you can adjust your expectations to meet theirs. I think that's part of what I've learned in this business. And when I have other people who work on my team, who I'm trying to mentor and you know, push and you know, push to succeed, I think that's part of what we all have to be able to do. We have to be able to change. We have to be able to size up the situations, size up what somebody is looking for, asking for. You know, we talked before about different countries who are, you know, the international buyer, and they all have different thought processes. So when you're with an international buyer, or when you're with a 70-year-old couple from the Upper East Side, or you're with a 20-year-old person who just got out of school and they want to, you know, get into the business, how do you deal with each of these people? You can't speak to everybody the same way. You need to just feel it out a little bit and then just be with them, do what they are doing. And you know, I think that leads to success.
Okay, chameleonness.
Chameleon.
Michael, I'm going to turn it to you next.
I mean, two main ideas, and this is maybe like just the dreaming bit. I mean, one, I think that we need to really think about a reckoning between our previous model of working and living. And I think the model of everybody rushing into Midtown Manhattan at 8 in the morning, you know, crowding into a subway car and then crowding out. I do think it's worth it for us to really rethink, is that the best model? Is that the most efficient way to work? Is that the most efficient way to live? Is that the highest quality of life? So I do think, I agree with Paul. I think office culture is not dead at all, but I do think that we should consider the rebalancing of how we work. And I think the last year has helped us, at least me, reflect on what I think of as deep work, when I'm like working and writing and researching and not collaborative, and I don't want to be collaborative, versus collaborative work where I'm brainstorming and really ideating. So I do think that that is a helpful lesson to be learned from COVID. But I do think, and this is one of the, you got a ton of press earlier in the year, but this idea of conversions of office buildings to residential or hotels to residential, I think that was a headline. It wasn't really a vision, but I do think that there's something there that we should really think hard about. It was, you know, part of the success of the rebound of Lower Manhattan was the program that helped incentivize the conversion of 1920s office buildings into residential buildings. Now, a hell of a lot harder to do it for a 1960s building, which tend to be fatter and less charming. And so I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but I do think there's something there if you consider the fact that we might have an oversupply of older, potentially subprime office buildings, and we do have a housing shortage. So there is a supply and demand equation there. I just think it needs a lot more thought than just like a headline saying, let's create a program, because it is very complex, you know, from, you know, the architect in me sees the complexity of it. I'm sure the real estate folks on this see the complexity, you know, how many people want, you know, a 60-foot deep apartment that's 20 feet wide? Probably not too many, but I do think there's an opportunity there that deserves, you know, careful thought and consideration.
Yeah. Okay, I like it. We'll have to come up with an email address that everyone who wants to sign up for the think tank that you're going to lead on this, Michael, can register. Well, Paul, I'm going to let you close us out on the question from your fan, Maria, where was Dennis? Sorry, no, not Dennis. Where did it go? Robert. It was Robert. Turning to you again. Thoughts on the future and how to successfully structure our attendees' practice and focus on their business model as we look forward to what the future of New York holds.
Yeah, well, so thank you, Robert, for the shout out about Massey Knackle and the 34 years. I've really loved this city and this industry, and I think a lot of us feel that way. I read a book, and I recommend it frequently. If you've read it, it's probably worth a reread. But Keith Ferrazzi wrote a book called Never Eat Alone Again, which is kind of a mercenary sounding title, always be networking, that kind of thing. But that really isn't the premise of the book. The premise of the book is that everybody he meets, he takes a personal interest in and tries to see or ask how he might help that person, irrespective of what industry they're in or what they're doing. So he's not keeping score. He's not transactional, and the wave of goodwill that he pushes out comes flowing back over him. He's a famous author and speaker and very successful person. But I think to the whole industry, I think we can be a team like that. We can help each other. So as you're interacting with everybody who's a counterparty or a partner of yours, just be thinking about how you can be helping them, and the industry will continue to be the great thing that it is in New York.
Okay, that is an excellent note to end on. And I think, thank you all from the bottom of my heart, and I think from all of our attendees, for a fabulous panel on all the exciting things happening here in New York and to happen. And I think as I look at, really today's conversation, I take, one of your key comments, Michael, is really, this is such a resilient place. We can bounce back from all these things that come at us, whether they are hurricanes, whether they are pandemics, as you mentioned, Paul, 4 of them in a row, whether they are regulations that sort of throw a curveball at us. We need to rethink how we're doing it. But it takes collaborative conversation and really intentional thought to make the outcomes of those conversations come to pass in a successful way. So thank you for all your participation, everyone. Thank you, Richard, and the entire HGAR team for being here and hosting today's session. With that, we'll sign off and wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. And there's a link in there for that book that Paul mentioned if anyone is interested. Take care and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Brian. Thanks, everybody.
Be well.
Thank you.
Oh, and Michael, for you,